got now the very, very big pleasure to introduce Richard Hell. Richard Hell is an American writer and musician, having set up his own press as a teenager very early, and having been an originator of punk in the 1970s, he has gone on to publish novels, including Go Now from 1996, as well as Godlike from 2005, as well as volumes of poetry and also essays. He is currently working on an autobiography. A very, very warm welcome to Richard Hell.
Hi. The poets are always kept out in the cold. Actually, I've gotten the best treatment at this venue that I've gotten for a long time, for a poetry venue. I mean, I think that's really why the poets and the painters have a relationship, because the painters are the only people dripping with money who respect the poets. In fact, they're probably the only people who respect the poets except for other poets. I'm going to read, what I decided to do was, I wrote a novel, it was published a couple of years ago, that's about poets. It's about the relationship between a 27-year-old poet and his young boyfriend who's 16. It takes place in New York in the early 70s. And so what I did to compile something to read here was I did a search through the book for poetry. Every instance where poetry was mentioned, and I strung those together, and they're just sort of in order. Paul, these two people's names who are the lead characters are Paul and T. Paul played a favorite mental trick for enjoying poetry readings and imagined the reader had died long ago, which I really find that's effective. Is that if you, you know, poetry readings are so boring, really, and if you imagine that the person who's reading has actually died, but you're somehow supernaturally transported to a place where you can see them, it gets kind of poignant and beautiful. Do you know what I mean that I am no one except that I am a poet? I will explain so that you cannot misunderstand. I do not want to be anyone. I have nothing to protect. I want to see and be seen through. I am given to see, and I see aloud. It is necessary that that cowardly imposition, be discarded in order that nothing interfere, that nothing interrupt, that nothing pollute what speaks. It isn't pretty, but it is poetry, and all we know of I know you know what I mean, have mercy on me. He talked of how the literary was sacred, but the literary was shit, that the poet's poor knowledge must be advanced in life for poetry to be real, that the poem is everything but incidental. It's shit and cum, it's tracks and mirrors, hair, snot, ricocheting beams. It's nothing, but it's all we get. And if we will be receptive, it's the thing itself, the nothing itself. And what else is there to desire, want, have, be? And it only follows from delirium, which is just ordinary life. No big deal, he said. The magic of intensest poetry snot penetrating literature. It's nice the way in old books of poetry some letterpress printed words are darker than others, dappled, camouflage. And then some poetry unexpected enough that chances are a stray word will pop quiz you, like say the word being in human being. I wish there was a way to guarantee that. It's so preferable to care about the words above oneself, though easier said than done. Poems do have a location and a lifespan. They become fossils, shells, and imprints of themselves, alive only to the most determined scholars or loving devotees of them. I am closer to the pure origins of his than anyone else will ever be. I am the way and the truth, but the sand is snow in this tedium. I want another pill, nurse. Science and poetry will become one, because I know who God is. At first, I thought it was the way things are. Now I realize it's our imagination of what made us, as opposed to the universe. But history isn't an accident. From this streaming whirl, what can I tear free? See through the eye, not with it, they say. Yawn. How to hold it all at once. It's 7:30 a.m. in Benares, declares feverish monkey. Think of milk, young girl, and her thoughts the capillaries feed lengthy tunnels to. Oh, so-called swollen streams in struggling misnomer, as if there was a will. And this I offer, this ancient vinyl platter known as the mole and what is made of it by the silent mountain boys, and tear free the fair tree, too, so the thought sings, nothing's sought. No, 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 no. The horrid actor broke down on the set. How close is the imagination to reality? Close enough. Even reality is not like reality. That's why poetry beats philosophy. The gutter drain in Paris at the end of the 19th century, slobbering mud and rubies, is the mouth of a tomb, buried church, a subterranean temple, as in Egypt, the flickering muzzle of the god jackal Anubis, guide to the underworld, while above the flame, inverted pubic hair triangle of the oil lamp street light rises from the wick which gathers as a storm gathers, the insults which comprise it, and the flame still always reaches upward perversely, no matter how the lamp sways. Poetry of Baudelaire, Baudelaire, not funeral wreaths dried in cities without evenings could serve as offerings to him when the very city's shimmering reality is the ghost, the soul of Baudelaire, like an atmospheric element we must breathe even if it kills us. What are cities without evening but reality and poetry? Paragraphs on pages do seem like clouds, like the interesting dirt behind the detergent container in the cupboard, and the men go somersaulting through them, physically fighting, suggesting sexual stories on the scale of cracked teacups. Those who deliver the new poetry make it possible for the world to go on. Otherwise, we would falter and harm ourselves as the repressed and neurotic do, though no one would even notice. Because nothing is known that can't be expressed, and the existing but unexpressed is the source of buggy behavior, though no one would even notice. New poetry shows us God, how things are. The poets aren't supposed to be beautiful or sane, shaggy, itchy, preoccupied, mal-educated. It's a dirty and stressful and antisocial calling. Cartoons as paradise, wistful yearning for cartoons, cartoons as eternity, Daffy Duck, Mickey Mouse, Bugs Bunny, Woody Woodpecker, Roadrunner, The Simpsons count too, the sparkle of Daffy's oily feathers in the eyes of Bart, maniacally cackling amidst the mint-conditioned can of Rumford's baking powder, celluloid earring, Speedy Gonzales, the latest from Helen Topping Miller's fertile escritoire, a sheaf of suggestive pics on greige, decal-edged stock, animated cartoons and comic books, the pinnacle of the 20th century, Walt Disney's Pinocchio. Oh, I will diffuse exquisitely in a mist of brave surrender to desire for entrance into great cartoons. Can I not be rewarded for this? If I think of a sunset landscape panorama for Porky Pig beckoning to me on my deathbed, can't I get some points? Do I have a witness as I swing up over the horizon like a boy on a fishing expedition? I think I do. I believe I do. Love is its own reward, too. The orchestra swells, ping, boing, wee, wee, as cross-eyed satyrs whose furry ears are really more like bunnies than goats, poop two-dimensional stars. Can you feel it? Or is it the worldly person's form of sentimentality? Are the cartoons really appealing because they're safe and have the proportions of children? But I love them. I love them so much. Mallarmé was the girdle of poetry. Stable and self-contained systems of description, of knowledge, of information are always flawed, incomplete to the understanding. A thing can only be known in terms from outside its own system, and the thing, system, in turn, can only be known in the terms of another, etc., ad infinitum. Symbolism, Mallarmé's writing, is the presentation of phenomena in a way that's consistent with this realization. Either mathematics is too big for the human mind, or the human mind is more than a machine. Gödel. It strives to present the truest, most beautiful rendition by presenting everything in terms of other things. It's the extreme acknowledgement of metaphor as the essence of poetry. Or rational thought can never penetrate to the final ultimate truth. R. Rucker, describing Gödel's incompleteness theorem. Poem as thing describing thing as poem. Ouroboros. The gutter drain, slobbering mud and rubies. That's not American, is it? You can tell right away. It sounds like a translation. My first guess would be Baudelaire, though in fact it is Mallarmé alluding to Baudelaire. It's a poem toward a monument for him. I remember how hard it was to enjoy such stilted-seeming alien constructions, phraseologies at first. Reading translation is hard. At the same time, a case could be made that for the serious reader, poetry is best read in translation. All writing is just means. It has no existence as writing, though it can have an existence as reflex, as compulsion, outside of the effects it produces in its readers. Reading a poem in translation forces one to grope for, to study, to intensely focus on extracting the full possibilities of it in a way less likely to be undertaken in relation to the original accessible language. It also forces one to surrender to the writer text, to grant it the benefit of all doubt. In fact, in an interview in 1891, Mallarmé himself said, "I believe to the contrary that there must be only illusion. The contemplation of objects, the images that soar from the reveries they have induced, constitute the song. The Parnassians, who take the object in its entirety and show it, lack mystery. They take away from readers the delicious joy that arises when they believe that their own minds are creating. To name an object is to suppress 3/4 of the enjoyment of the poem, which derives from the pleasure of step-by-step discovery. To suggest, that is the dream. It is the perfect use of this mystery that constitutes the symbol, to evoke an object little by little so as to bring to light a state of the soul, or inversely, to choose an object and bring out of it a state of the soul through a series of unravelings." What does a translation do but allude? I see a magnificent panorama of intellectual and sensual activities flowering across the open skies like confetti or the internal organs of developed motion picture film. In the future, all poetry will be translation. T remembered he'd brought along a new poem of Ted's. The skywriting of all things was directed at me, leering, "Come at once, or the plums may rot." Well, naturally, I thought I should comply, so I shined my lobes, bid adieu to everyone I ever knew, but you, which is why I'm writing now, of course, adjusted foreskin, knocked one back, and fled to that small town, having thought better. But there the falling leaves proved hung on sturdy limbs. That hurt, and I felt badly disassociated. Then another biplane happened over. How could it be? A parachutist bended towards me, took my hand, and guided it. Oh, relief. So it was all precisely as intended. You write things down to keep them, or to assert, this is interesting. It was just coming to be dawn outside. T gave himself to the dawn, dreamed in the dawn, dreamed its bidding.
Rain on me.
He said to Paul, the poets are despicable. They are worse than tyrants because they are deceivers and scum. They not only leave all life out of their poetry, but whereas by writing a poem they affirm the value of poetry among all things, in their behavior they are as small and greedy and timid and cheap as the worst cowardly submitters to policemen and grovelers before public opinion. But then the next moment he would say it's all a joke. He was Satan, His filthy humor came from clearly seeing the guts of everything that everyone denied. His filthy humor came from science. I was just a stupid wife whom he tolerated for company and out of charity, while I thought we were two happy children free to wander in a paradise of sadness. All poetry is translation. You must write your own poetry. Really, poetry must be written by all. He had written a sonnet when he was 14. Evening prayer. I, an angel at toilet, sit forever with beer and smoking tobacco and drinking my beers, my head full of shit, dreams, and I'm wacko, my head full of dreams that burn like phosphorus, heart like a hunk of raw, torn wood, my head unwilling to act as the boss for us, sad heart crying its gold sap blood. And once I've carefully swallowed the dreams, I turn from the beer and leave the room to meadows outside where the burning deems me lord, and I sweetly piss in the womb of the dark skies high in glorious streams that bless and gratify every bloom. The world turns and we become sick. He defined vertigos. I do believe that true life is elsewhere. We are not in the world. The things we do, their incoherence, their blindness and stupidity are in heaven numberless pure friezes of glory. His poems are earthly frames and fragments, gauzes and gazes of those golden eternities full of shit. Life has a subtext. Isn't that an exciting idea? The wonderful thing about poetry is that it really is always out of fashion. Poetry is the place of no low values. Poetry has no ambition but itself. That is how it refreshes, nourishes. Quote, poetry is making a comeback, unquote. But why is it always bad poetry or a false idea of poetry that is making a comeback? I don't think good poetry has ever made a comeback or ever will. That's one reason it's necessary to keep on writing it. When I open a book to find a poem, I feel like I've gotten to heaven, where it's obvious what matters, while elsewhere what matters is hidden. It's joy or not. It's penetrating the veil as a matter of course.